Hi, we are officially live. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get started, I'll do some quick introductions. I'm Jeannie DeVito with Romance Writing Academy. I'm a professional developmental editor and writing instructor, and I specialize in romance. So I am very, very excited to host romance authors who are doing it and doing it so beautifully so folks can learn and engage. And our guest today is Kate Meader. So welcome, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us on a Sunday.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. I can't wait to dive deep into romance.
All right, especially yours. So let me read your bio really quick because I don't want to miss any of this good stuff. And it's so well written. It's like so perfect. It spells everything out. About Kate. Originally from Ireland, USA Today bestselling author Kate Meader cut her romance reader teeth on Maeve Binchy and Jilly Cooper novels, with some harlequins thrown in for variety. Give her tales about brooding mill owners, oversexed equestrians, and men who can rock an apron, fire hose, or hockey stick, and she's there. Now based in Chicago, she writes sexy contemporary romance with big-hearted guys and strong heroines and heroes who can match their men quip for quip. So true. Oh my gosh. So we are talking specifically today about Four Player, which is a standalone high heat contemporary romance in the Rookie Rebel series, right? Do you mind giving us, I mean, you've got some amazing series, but I know they all kind of go together but stand separately. So do you mind giving us just a quick intro to the series that you've got out right now?
Sure. So the series that I got out now is called The Rookie Rebels. So it's a spin-off of an original series called The Chicago Rebels. And the Chicago Rebels series was about a team called the Chicago Rebels. So I'm not even sure how I came up with that name, but that was the name I came up with. Even though I'm not sure Rebels even fits with Chicago, but who knows? So that's what I came up with. So that's another fun thing. Like sometimes I look at other authors, like team names, and I'm there, damn, I wish I had thought of that. It was so great, Anyway, so Chicago Rebels was the original, the OG crew kind of thing, and there was 5 books in that, and now I decided to kind of go back to that and spin it off. So now we're in, I think I'm about to release book 5 like next month of this newer series. So that'll be like the 10th book in the series. So the first 5 you could kind of read and feel like you kind of got the full picture of that series, because it happens over the course of 1 year. Even though they're all standalone, it kind of, I think, helps to read them in order, just because it's the drive to the playoffs, kind of thing. So it's like all happening in this kind of chronological order, and as a result, there's kind of overlap and that kind of thing. These ones, the newer ones, are definitely, you could, I think, dive in a little bit more easily into any of the books at any time.
At any time. Oh, and this is a perfect time for me to remind folks watching, please feel free to chat on whatever platform you're watching on. Any questions you have for Kate, especially about writing craft or her book specifically, like this time is also for you to learn and grow. So Kate is an amazing author to learn from. And so that leads me to my first question is, seriously balancing such a huge cast in the timeline. So the Rookie Rebels follows basically about a year's time. Is that when you actually stop in and check in with yourself on, okay, I want to write 5 books, 10 books in this series. Do you start with that timeline, or do you just kind of find your way as each book happens? Walk us through your process of planning a little bit.
Okay. So, well, for the Chicago Rebels, which was the original series, that one kind of made sense because I placed a kind of a ticking time bomb on the story. So the story's timeline, so that they had to achieve a certain goal by a certain time, or they were going to lose the team. So essentially, it was 3 half-sisters inherited a hockey team from their maverick can I swear, but he's like an a-hole father, like a really bad dad kind of thing. And the half-sisters didn't really get along. The oldest sister had always felt that she was the one who's destined to be the owner of the team. And then these 2 half-sisters are brought in who she doesn't like and has never really spent any time with. And they're all told, you got to make a success of the team. You got to get to the playoffs, or the team will be sold to some shady consortium in the wings, kind of thing, So, so it's one of those things where, like, this is in the will. It's romance legal versus real legal. We all know what romance legal is, right? So, it's like the term like we give to things that wouldn't really happen in real life and would probably, be thrown out of court of law, but in a romance world, it makes sense to kind of construct a story around this. So the beauty of this was that, first of all, I was starting out with heroines instead of heroes for sports romance series, which is kind of unusual. Most sports romance series are very geared towards the guys, and the heroes and their connections are kind of what makes it. While not to say that the heroines aren't important, but the heroines kind of come in more like as an afterthought, or they're there in some kind of relationship with the guys. In this one, I thought I wanted to put a little spin on it and have the women be actually in charge of the guys' financials to a certain extent. These guys, the women were in charge of the make or break these guys' careers. So that's how it started. And also at the same time, I had this overarching theme of the sisters having to get to know each other, and their story kind of evolves over those 3 books as well. And I think that's what people really liked about that original series, was that it wasn't just about the guys. There was the romances, and each was a standalone romance, and they each found their romances, but they were all about the sisters also finding themselves by finding each other as well. So there was that too. So that series kind of made sense to have that contracted timeline set over a year. Now with this newer series, it's not as important but the theme of this one, I try to have like each series have some kind of theme of some sort or some kind of connection. It's not just guys playing hockey, or like, I hope it's not. But this one is like all the guys are considered rookies, but they're not rookies because they're straight out of college or straight out of, or just recently drafted. They're more likely rookies because they spent some time either doing it or they missed their career chance the first time around, and now they're back and they're rookies to this team, but also kind of rookies in that they're all on roads to redemption, or they had some tragedy or something that knocked them out of the game or something like that. So that's kind of what I was trying to do to tie this group of heroes together. So, but now this one they're kind of like taking place maybe over a little longer period of time, so they haven't yet made it back to the playoffs. I'm kind of holding that in reserve to kind of get them back there.
Can I just say you've touched on almost like all of my favorite buzzwords in teaching romance writing, is like the ticking time clock. You've got to have the redemption arc in some way. And sort of, when you developed your characters in that timeline, were you thinking at all about tropes, or really like, because hockey is such a huge theme, like, did you feel that helped you? How did you approach just actually, okay, I've got this big idea, it's huge. How do I narrow it down and just tell the story of one couple?
Right. Well, so the big idea was, of course, was the Will, the sisters, whatever. But also it was, I had this idea, like I wanted to do like, King Lear in hockey, which just makes it sound very, very grand, right? So like you have the 3 sisters, you have the father who's like this bigger, larger than life character who kind of controls their lives all in some kind of, horrid way that has kind of like held them back to a certain extent. But each book, of course, then had to not all of them, but a lot of hockey romance is kind of workplace romance and the taboo of workplace romance, which is boss employee romance kind of thing. The beauty of this one is that the heroes are the employees and the women are the bosses. So in this case, all the women own the teams and own the team. They're all the bosses, and all the guys are the employees. So there's that kind of element too. A little subverted a little bit to a certain extent, so that traditional boss employee romance is kind of turned on its head a little bit. As for each one, it was kind of like, you had like first one's kind of like broken rich girl kind of thing, can't get daddy's attention, so there was kind of a little bit of elements there, a bit of a ball buster versus a guy who was like so easygoing that's wonder he didn't fall over, like, just standing there. It's like, this guy was like, but at the same time, in a particular part of his career where he feels it's his last shot, it's his last chance, and now he's been traded to this team that sucks, the second worst team in the league. Why am I here? Kind of thing. And one of the interesting things that I love about hockey romance, because I'll tell you a little secret here. I'm not actually a huge hockey fan, so I like hockey, but I'm actually a bigger tennis fan. That's my sport. So tennis is my sport, and that's what I will kind of live and die for. And I will do tennis all the time kind of thing, but I'm not a gigantic hockey fan. So I did have to do a lot of research on it because I don't actually watch a lot of hockey. I've watched more now, but I didn't at the time. But what I was really more interested in was the business side of it, particularly like with these players who are kind of like traded almost like commodities, you know, they're assets. They're all they're good for is like how they can contribute to the team. And, you know, that's important. They're multi-million-dollar athletes, whatever. But it was kind of interesting about how that business side of it impacts romance, you know, so, or the longevity or the potential for romance, the likelihood they could be like, leave the city at any point. Like, does the wife and girlfriend always follow them around? It's like, how does that work? And like, how does that really impact the realism of a romance? Or do we just assume that like once they get their HEA that no, nobody's ever traded again, they all stay where they are and that's it, you know? So I try to bring it up sometimes later on in some of the later stories, like when I go back into some of the earlier guys, it's like, oh yeah, that person's probably going to get traded, or there's a threat of trade hanging over their head, or they want a multi-year contract and that kind of thing. So there's all this kind of elements that are hockey adjacent that I thought was kind of interesting. And I think I've just gone off on a tangent, not answered your question at all. But each book I do try to have a trope, you know, and I've gone more back to the tropes, I think. Like in the beginning, I was more like, oh, it's just workplace romance, and I don't really look at it any like beyond that. But now I'm trying to like hit tropes often. I'm there. If I haven't done that before, I think I want to do that one, you know, kind of thing. So the 4-player is essentially the standard trope romance, which is like a brother's best friend, you know, so that's like one of our favorites, right? You know, so we love that one. Starts out a little bit kind of enemies to lovers, turns into enemies to lovers to friends, with the brother's best friend kind of overlaying it. But the interesting thing about this one too is that she's like an athlete as good or better than him. Like she's Olympic, headed, you know, like he's not, you know, so like, it's like, she's got this different kind of aura to her than if she was just like maybe another kind of traditional heroine, perhaps.
You more than answer it. In fact, I feel like you're already seeing all the questions we're getting because you've led us right perfectly on the path for this one. This is such a great question. I'm going to pop it up for you to read, but I feel like you could go in any direction with this question. It's such a big one. So how do you create an engaging and immersive romance to make readers invest in that main relationship? And I think, I mean, you've talked around like the tropes and like the research and things, but maybe go deeper into your world building process. Do you keep a character Bible? Like, how do you decide about point of view? Have you ever played around with first versus third and thought, oh, I can't tell the story this way? Like, anything goes.
Right. This is a great question. I think it gets to the heart, I think, of what all of us romance writers and editors are trying to do. So, because I find that my first drafts are very, very messy, and the draft even that I think it's pretty clean in terms of like, you know, it's readable, but it takes me a while, and it takes me maybe a couple or 2 or 3 rewrites to actually get the depth that you're looking for, the immersion that you're looking with. Like, and I think the engaging and the immersive are actually 2 different things. I can make a book very engaging with like kind of witty banter and kind of, you know, make these characters kind of likable. But the immersive part, I think, is where you're trying to get to this depth of character that is very hard to do on like a first draft, you know. So like, at least to me anyway, particularly because I'm a pantser, I'm not a plotter. So it takes me a while to kind of like circle back to those, and I do a lot of rewriting. So I try to draft fairly quickly, but I rewrite maybe 3 or 4 times as long, you know, for the editing part of it, you know. So, and each rewrite, I hope, is kind of getting more to the immersion of that character. I don't do character Bibles. I don't do like interviews with my characters. I don't do any of that kind of stuff, which I know like some people swear by. But I find that if I do too much kind of prep for each character, that it kind of ruins it for me a little bit. And then or I feel like there's a certain busy work element to do because I'll end up just changing it anyway. So if I outlined more, if I did a little bit more plotting, maybe the character Bible stuff would help me a little bit more. But I think part of it too is that you're trying to, for a hero and heroine or a hero and hero, because I also write you know, or like male romance as well. So essentially you have these 2 people who are trying not to fall in love with each other, right? So that's the trick, like how to kind of take them through that story of trying not to connect, but you're always trying to but the writer underneath, the evil writer, is always looking for the connections and the ways to make them bond and whatever, even though they're somewhat resentful of the process, really. Like, our characters kind of hate us, I think, because they hate being forced to fall in love. We're not, the hope is that it doesn't look like being forced by the end of it, and that it was this natural progression that was planned all along, kind of thing. But that's really what the writers are trying to do, is like take these two people who are the best people for each other and the worst people for each other. And why are they the best? The best people, or the best person who completes them, for want of a better phrase, and also the worst person because they challenge them in such a way that they're not ready for, or they're not, so that's kind of like what you're trying to do, is trying to find the happy medium of that, to keep those two people, to make them the right people for each other.
Kate, and you have all of this in your head without plotting and outlining. Like, that's amazing to know that you want to balance all of these elements. It's literally like you're narrating a craft book to us. Like, this is how you do it. This is exactly how you do it. And I don't write anything.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, I think part of it is like, after I'm almost like on 30 books now, that it feels sort of innate, like, kind of thing. But each book is still like, as you write more books, the more you realize you don't know. We all know that. Like, you're kind of writing, it's like, I should be able to just like, pull this off. I should be able to, like, I used to think that the more I got into this, it would take me, I would go from 6 months to 4 months to 3 months to write a book. I should be able to just throw it together. It's so much easier. And I'm not really a fast writer. I used to be able to write 3 books a year, and now I'm lucky if I can write 2, so I think that it takes me longer almost now, because I know that I know less. And as a result, I question stuff more. And I kind of like, okay, it's like, is that going to work, kind of thing, when maybe I shouldn't be as questioning as I am, but I guess questioning is good. But you want to think that you're kind of building on craft, and that each book is improving on the last. Though I'm sure some people will tell me, oh, your earlier stuff was better. Like, whatever you were doing back then, do it again. And it's like, well, I don't know. I'm hoping I'm getting better, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not getting better at all. So, but I want to.
Well, and it's almost like a mixed blessing. In the beginning, you don't know what not to do. So maybe you're more risky and you do things that you think this could work, and then you're not sure it does over the long haul. And that I'll bring up this question, because this is a great one as well, from Tiara. Thank you. What's your editing process? So obviously you work with editors, but for yourself, if you're writing 2 or 3 books a year and you're not plotting things out and you're just kind of going with your muse, what ends up happening? Do you find that you are taking scenes out, rewriting scenes? Like, walk us through a day in the life of writing, and then also next step, revising.
Sure. Yeah. So when I'm writing, I find that I'm actually, because first of all, I still have my daytime job. So I only write like maybe 2-3 hours in the evenings, and they write like all day, like Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes I'll take Sunday off if I'm feeling I'm not too far behind, kind of thing, but often I will be. So my time seems, not to say that full-time writers' time isn't precious. I mean, it's just, it feels a little bit more precious. So as a result, when I'm writing, I think about the scene before I start writing it. So that's about as much outlining as I'm kind of doing. I'm kind of thinking like, what do I want to get done in this scene? What hook do I want to end on? How is it going to relate to the previous scene and the next scene? I don't mind writing out of order. So I'm fine with doing that, particularly with kind of writing stuff where I know it's like, oh, I'm kind of excited about that. And particularly if you think, oh, there's a high point, I need to get to this point in the story, kind of thing. I have no idea what the connective tissue is between the 5 scenes and before it and whatever, kind of thing. I know something will happen here. So I don't mind kind of skipping ahead, because I know I'm going to end up doing a lot of rewriting anyway, but at least I kind of got the basics of it there like that. So I try to do like maybe a 50,000 word draft in like a month or 6 weeks that will have kind of like the basics, usually without the last 5 to 6 chapters, because that to me is like, I need to rewrite everything first before I can kind of like steamroll to the end, So I usually kind of hit it up until like maybe the dark moment or something, or the bleak moment, or maybe just a little bit before that, because sometimes I find that even that moment changes with each draft, like, I know some people don't know how to get to, or don't know how to write this book until they know what that bleak moment is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like, I can probably do 3 or 4 different versions of that, focusing on maybe a conflict that I hadn't really thought about as clearly, or that I didn't know was going to really contribute as much. So I can kind of do that. And then I'll take maybe 3 to 4 months editing or revising. And by the time I'm finished, I'm just so sick of it that I just don't want to read it or look at it anymore. And it's like, okay, I'm kind of done here. So I will kind of send that into my editor, and then she'll rip it apart, and I'm okay with that. I've worked with like New York editors who sometimes didn't touch it at all. Like, are there, oh, this is good, this looks fine kind of thing. And I would prefer somebody kind of takes the scalpel and goes into surgery. Jean, we haven't worked together, so I don't know what kind of editor. I'm kind of going to guess that you're probably a ripper, or that you probably are okay with telling those hard truths to an author. And I appreciate that kind of editor relationship too. Some people, I think, want to have the pat in the head and be told how wonderful they are, but I'm after the initial hurt of, oh, why don't they get what I'm trying to say here? Why they don't understand? I kind of get over myself, and I kind of get to work with fixing the book. And so like this book I wrote most recently, my editor kind of loved it up until like 60%. And then she's there. No, now this, the rest of this, let's fix it, kind of thing. You did it all wrong. It's like, kind of thing. So, I mean, she's super nice about it, but it's like I can hear what's going on in her head. But so by that time, like, and then I'm probably going to spend another 2 to 3 weeks rewriting it, based on what the editor tells me. And I don't agree with absolutely everything she says, but I probably agree with 90%. So it's like, and you need somebody else really to kind of look at that, because it's like, I know there's some people are just, they trust themselves implicitly kind of thing. I just don't trust myself at all, so especially after I've revised some months, it's like, I don't know if this is any good anymore. I thought it was good, but I don't really know. So I need somebody else to tell me if it's good. I was talking to another author friend, and we both are using the same editor, and I kind of recommended this editor to her, and she's like, yeah, she gave me like 18 pages of notes, and she goes, I didn't know if that was a good thing or not. And I'm there, that's a good thing. That's like, that just means it's got good stuff or ideas to how to help your book. Because I've worked with editors who are like, I think you should do something different here, and don't really give you much suggestion. I love getting the suggestions, because I'm all out of suggestions. I need somebody to help me, like how this should go. So I think that editor-writer relationship, should be like the strongest it can be, and you shouldn't be afraid to tell the truth.
Exactly. I mean, if we could edit ourselves, how much faster and simpler would all of this be? I mean, it's even just when you're thinking about, like, you have an idea that you've seen it so much, you've lived with it every night, every weekend, you don't even know anymore if it's any good. We lose perspective because we get so deep. And I'm so glad you shared that you still have, we would call a day job, because so many people who really want to write, and especially want to write in this genre, feel like, I can't do it unless I commit all in. And especially over, the pandemic, people have reached out to us saying, like, how do I know when to quit my day job? And it's like, you may never want to. Like,
yeah.
Everyone's career and journey is different. And I don't want to talk over all these amazing questions. I do want to share a couple more of them, but really quick, in terms of your journey, did you start out loving romance? Were you always a romance reader, or how did you end up in this space?
So when I was younger, I think I was more of a women's fiction reader. So I kind of mentioned you mentioned in my bio, like the Maeve Binchy and Jilly Cooper, who is on opposite ends of the spectrum, actually. So Maeve Binchy, very like sweet, kind of like, women's fiction. Jilly Cooper, what was known as like bunk busters, I think they used to call her books, So she was kind of like a British Jackie Collins. So Jackie Collins is British, but she writes more for an American sensibility kind of thing. But she was very much like, it was very set in the, like Jilly Cooper set in the horsey kind of like, world, so with royals and that kind of stuff. So like, I kind of like love those books, like, super filthy, but, also like, super funny and kind of, well done. And then when when I got a little older, I think I kind of just really enjoyed historicals more than anything else. I was more like a historical reader when I was younger, so, Catherine Cookson and just some of these kind of like more old school. I think the first romance I remember reading was Fires of Winter, which I think was Joanna Lindsay. And it was like just like a Viking romance, and there was a lot of references to his sword. And, and I was oh, I wonder what that means. It's like, oh, that's what that means. Yeah, right. I was 12, so that's kind of like, but I kind of skipped or stopped reading it when I went to college. I think a lot of people kind of, think that, I actually went to law school in Dublin, and law school there is done at undergraduate level. So that was my bachelor's degree, was like a law degree. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm supposed to be reading more important stuff now. So that's what I was kind of thing, like we all go through these phases where it's like, we're all too good for romance, kind of thing, so, but not all of us, but some of us do anyway. So, and then when I moved to the States, I just kind of picking it up again. And I think I just, but it was always, I think, more just never really would have thought that, oh, I could do this or anything. I didn't really think that. I'd written a little bit when I was younger, but nothing majorly. I was trying to think of, like, we were talking about like prep questions for this. It's like, a lot of people say, oh, I was writing since I was, before I could hold a pen. I was writing, that kind of thing. So, but not so much me. I remember I wrote like a time travel romance that came third in a contest at the library or something when I was like 8 or 9 or something. And that's like the only remembrance I have of actually writing anything when I was a kid that I was brave enough to submit for competition. But then when I was about to turn 40, so just to tell you, hey kids, you can do this at any time and it's never too late, right? I just started like thinking that I would like come home from work and I would just like, have dinner and I'd watch TV and I'd be kind of like, is this it? I think there's kind of maybe more. So I decided I'm going to do nano. So I did the Nanowrimo. I think a lot of people start out kind of testing the waters where they could have a book in them when they do the Nanowrimo is National Novel Writing Month, which is always in November. And a lot of people try to do a book. The idea is to get like 50,000 words done, a draft of a book in a month. So I did that, like, I think I want to say 2010, November of 2010. And I didn't look at the book for another 6 or 8 months. And then towards the end of 2011, I just took it out and I threw everything except the first chapter. I loved the first chapter and I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And that actually ended up being the first book I published. I got my agent bought that, took me on based on that book. She sold that book 3 weeks later. So in essentially a year after I started looking at it again. So in 2012 is when she sold the book, like first of a chef trilogy. It's called Feel the Heat. So I was kind of like, okay. But I still went into it not really thinking that this could be a career, but then as you do it more and more, you start thinking, okay, maybe I've got some, or people start resonating with your books and stuff. But I didn't really kind of gain any, I wouldn't say notoriety or anything, but I didn't really gain a readership until my firefighter books. I wrote a series of books called Hot in Chicago that did pretty well. And one of the books won was a Washington Post Best Romance and Publishers Weekly Best Romance of that year. In 2015, it won like an award, RT, book awards and stuff like that. So that book kind of, I wouldn't say like put me in the stratosphere, but kind of got eyeballs onto my book, so then I've been published since 2013, but still keeping my day job. And I'm actually at a point where I might not need to keep my day job anymore, but I kind of like keeping the balance. And part of it too is that when I write full time, if I have like a week off and I decide to write, I find it's hard for me to write like more than 3 or 4 hours a day, so I'm thinking, well, I can still do this with my day job right now. It's not like, it's tough to juggle both, but it's manageable and I've managed right now. So I'm going to continue this for a little while anyway, just to see how it is. But yeah, I did a lot of things like entering contests. Remember chapter contests? Do they still exist? I don't know. So I think, I did a lot of that, with my first book and all those kinds of things where you're trying, like people said horrible things about my book when my first 3 chapters, when I would put them in, stuff like, I mean, I've heard horrible things about my writing, so I know that the writing can get better, so though I mean, I'm not sure that every horrible thing said about my books was justified, but some of it was probably justified. But I know that, that it's really possible to improve. And it's just one of those things where, it's an expertise thing. You just like, what do they say, the 10,000 hours or something to become an expert. It's definitely the same with this. I mean, I'm sure there's some people who can just like those rare birds who can kind of pull it out and just like, yeah, clean first draft, my first book, yeah, publish me, I'm good to go kind of thing. But that's 99.9% of us. That's not how it is. And we need editors and we need time to kind of grow our craft.
Absolutely. And it's worth the investment. It really is an investment because, as you've said, you get better book to book, you feel more comfortable, maybe even faster if that's important to you. We've got a fabulous question that's going to take us right back into 4-player, because that was one of the questions that I had. So thank you for this question from Megan. But you have some great unexpected villains and also unexpected friendships in 4-player. So we have a question about writing a romance novel, not quite sure how to make the villain and the hero have some sort of collusion. That might be a little bit too specific, but maybe talk about your villain and 4-player and how you developed, some of those more complex relationships and use like characters who are anti-heroes and they're trying to get in the way of what your main characters want.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it can be very tempting to kind of go maybe a stereotypical route of making like an ex a villain, for example, or like, or some guy who, won't give the heroine the time of day. So, for example, in this one, in 4-player, the hero, it's, as well as being a brother's best friend's romance, it's also a lessons in seduction romance. So that's another trope that we love. And I had never written before. And I thought, okay, I want to write one of those, so essentially where the heroine, it's usually the heroine, asks the hero, can you help me get this other guy? And I don't know how to kiss right, kind of thing, so, that kind of thing. I need somebody to help me do this kind of stuff, and the complication was she was asking her brother's best friend to give her this guidance in achieving this goal she had of number one, getting her trial for the Olympics on track, and he was a hockey player. He's going to help her with that. And in also number 2 was, by the way, can you give me some tips on how to get this guy into my bed and win his heart, kind of thing, So there was a temptation to make this other guy, the villain to a certain extent. And then there was also, because the book starts with the hero essentially rejecting a marriage proposal from his now ex, but the girl he brings to a wedding catches the bouquet, thinks now, hey, we're set, kind of thing. And he's there, nope, that's not going to happen. That doesn't fly with my goals to be a bachelor for life. And then sort of uses the heroine to make his case. Like, so, and as a result, they kind of sets up this little kind of, conflict between them. But then I thought, wouldn't that be interesting if the ex who caught the bouquet and is kind of like flounced off in a huff actually turns out to be a more fully fleshed character and is interesting. So I have heard them become friends with the heroine. So sort of behind the hero's back, and hears about it later. And he's kind of like, what, you guys are friends? I don't get it. Are you guys talking about me all the time? Of course, he thinks it's all about him. And it's not about him at all. They're just girls who wanted to be friends, so I thought that would be kind of interesting. So taking what would traditionally be like a potentially villainous role, and I think all through the book, there is possibly a little bit of an undercurrent as to whether the ex is going to turn on the heroine. Like, will she kind of do a kind of a bros for hoes thing or something, and just be like she'll try and make a jump on the guy or something like that, so I didn't write it that way, but it didn't turn out that way. So spoiler, she doesn't. But I thought it would be kind of interesting just to kind of have there. So the true villain really of the piece is the woman who kind of like blackballed the heroine in hockey, like in the industry, you know. So there's like somebody who's in a more powerful position than her, who has control over her career to a certain extent, and has kind of like ruined her career. And as a result, she's the one that's kind of in the background, this kind of almost sort of shadowy figure. She appears a couple of times, but I don't really spend too much time on her. But she's there, I think, just to kind of remind us that that the people who are on the page aren't always like the villains that you should go with. So I don't know if that really helps or answers the question. I mean, part of it too is that I don't write romantic suspense. So if your villain is more of that nature, then that's probably something that you're going to have a very kind of keen plotting to kind of pull those two together and make that work. But I suppose every book to a certain extent has some sort of antagonist or some sort of villain, even if there isn't like a traditional suspense element to it too. I don't know, Jeannie, what you think about putting villains in and where we pull our villains for our various books.
I know, depending on the subgenre, it's so tricky, because I think in contemporary, you're right, like the impulse is go with what we know, which is a stereotypical, like the evil ex or the, you know, female rivalry thing. And that's one of the things I loved about the book so much, is you just subverted all of those, and it was so subtle. And ultimately then the way, which is amazing to me because you don't plot, because I feel like this was so beautifully crafted, the way that you brought in Mia's journey, and then, you know, and again, trying to not give too many spoilers away, but it all fit together like a puzzle piece. You're like, oh, her journey into hockey, out of hockey, and then even Mia overcoming her own trauma. It was just, it all fit together. So for the writer who asked the question, I would definitely recommend reading Four Player, because Kate does a beautiful job and none of it felt predictable. I was excited, engaged, but also like, oh, that worked out perfectly. Like it's like you planned it. And you did it.
Well, yeah, I owe a lot of it actually to my editor, who I think is on in the messages there. I'm seeing edits by Christy. Hi, Christy. My editor has dropped by to say hi. So like she was kind of like really good at, and I think this is where having an editor really comes in, because sometimes I wasn't even seeing the whole story or the connections. And I think part of it too is I was almost too close your view, and she was able to look on, she's there like, well, she goes, wouldn't it be great, she goes, if you kind of like made this piece connect to this piece kind of thing, and then that kind of like wraps up that part, like maybe a little bit in a bow to a certain extent, but if you wanted to kind of tie that loose end together, that would be a good way to do it. So sometimes you need somebody else to kind of like read and see the connections that you're like saying, oh, well, it's great you don't plot. And it's like, if I plotted better, maybe I would have figured out those connections quicker. But sometimes having somebody else do that, a little bit of that work for you, or see it just from one or two reads, what you could be doing to make that a little bit smoother, is it's gold, really, to have that kind of support.
That's the dream. It sounds like you have an ideal, perfect editor-author relationship. Like you've got all the raw materials, and that editor doesn't try to destroy your voice or change your story, but brings it all together in a way that you're like, I have all this stuff and I'm not sure what to do with it. And they help. It's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And yeah, one of the things that's kind of important though, is that I've worked with editors who do the kind of the more what I call voice crushing to a certain extent, who are, less concerned with the developmental editing, which is what I appreciate and what I look for and what I need, and more concerned with like kind of like line editing and changing a line. I'm sure like you probably do both, but I'm at a point in my career where I don't really want line editing, or I don't need line editing. I've had it done with, even with the editor I work now. I think our first book together, I said, I don't know really like how we'll work together. So let's do a developmental edit and do a line edit kind of thing. And not to say that she did major change with the line edit, but I was kind of like, I don't think I'm going to need that, because the line editing stuff is kind of where my voice truly is, so I think I don't really want too much change there. It's like, I kind of know what I should while to kind of, first of all, to develop your voice, like I don't think voice kind of hits out of the gate. Look, if I was to read my first or second book, I think like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound like anything like I am now, or what my voice is like now. So I think that really does develop. But I think when you're looking for an editor, it's kind of important to think like, well, where are the that feel that you need to plug in, and what is the gaps that you have. And for me, it's because, and part of it too is because I don't plot, I really do need somebody who's really strong on the developmental side to kind of help me kind of develop the characters, or to kind of see the through line of stuff, and to kind of make stuff just kind of like fit together, and to have that emotional impact there at the end, or throughout, but mostly I think towards the end, after you kind of got over the lust phase, which is up to like 50%, and then you kind of move into the heart phase, so I think that's kind of what I'm kind of looking for, somebody to kind of like bring those two pieces together effectively, and not so much the voice stuff.
Exactly. Nobody wants to have to deal with the commas ever. So the voice and the story, the technical stuff. Did you work with editors early on? Like, that's a common question. People want to know, like, very first book, do they need to hire an editor before they submit? If they're planning on pursuing maybe traditional publishing, like, what was your journey to working with an editor and getting to that point where you were like, we're the team, we're doing it?
Yeah, so I didn't, so my first book, I didn't have an editor before it was submitted, but my agent was actually very kind of heavy on the reading the book and doing it, and like kind of editing the book essentially. So my agent kind of edited the book before it was submitted. That's kind of unusual. I don't know if it's unusual. I don't know if agents are doing a lot of hand holding these days, but back in those days, that was what my agent was doing. So right up until I think maybe my last traditionally published book, my agent was reading my books beforehand. I wasn't even sending it to betas or anything. I know some people kind of swear by betas, or having somebody do like an edit or pre-edit before it gets to the official house edit. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of what I was doing. Now it's just me and my editor. But back in the day, if you have an agent, maybe your agent is willing to kind of take that on. But I do think that it doesn't hurt to have somebody edit your book before you submit for traditional publishing. It probably wouldn't hurt, just because but with the recognition that by the time it gets to the house edit is probably going to change it completely, but if you want to have the strongest possible package, then maybe that would be the way to go. But, so I think it kind of depends on how the route you want to take. But if you want to go to an agent, you might want to get something edited even before you get to the agent. But if you're pretty confident about what your work is, but then who's confident? I don't know. Some people are super confident. I'm not, but some people seem to be like, they know that the package they have is absolutely great, and somebody will be publishing this the day after tomorrow. So yeah, I don't know.
I don't think there's one right way or one right answer. I think everybody finds their way somehow. I have clients who have published multiple things traditionally, but not romance. And then they hire an editor for romance, and they're like, you just helped me understand what I already know. But then, of course, the agent does their notes and the house. Right. So I think it's just whatever you can do to bring your best work to whatever your goal is, indie, traditional, is great. And also mindful of like resources, editing when it's done right isn't necessarily like the cheapest thing out there for people. So betas, especially early on when you're aspiring, can be really, really effective. But this is another great question, and I want to make sure we get a chance to run through it. How do you get to your HEA in the resolution, which I know we all want those that are happy ever after in some form. And this writer, Tiara, is saying, I find that sometimes getting the wedding or the engagement ring feels forced, but for you, it doesn't seem that way. And I just want to say with Foreplayer, especially to go back to, because it was the cutest bookend, the way you kind of opened and sort of kicked off that device and then ended. Not to be vague, but I don't want to give it away because it's so clever, and I did not see that ending coming, and I loved it so much. So how in your genius of non-plotting do you do this? Because it's so great. It's
right.
So clever.
Well, I think it's okay to talk just like about the device, even though we won't talk about really how it's used. But essentially, if a lot of us are familiar or like watch avidly or read avidly the we can swear, right? Am I the asshole posts, right? So so I reframed this, like I kind of call it, I think I call it Am I the Dick or something like that. I kind of have like another version of it, right? So it's like, not that it's copyright, I'm sure I could have just used it or whatever, but I decided I'm going to call it something else. But essentially it's the same idea, which is, you know, somebody puts in a question and to their online peers and to be judged, you know, it's like, you know, have I done something dickish in this situation? Please judge me, you know, or that kind of thing. So we kind of use this device to kind of kickstart the story to a certain extent. And then we kind of come back to it at the end as a kind of a cute way to do it. And I think part of it too is that it's always nice if you can kind of mirror something at the end to what's happened at the beginning. There's a certain, you know, symmetry to that, which is kind of nice, and writers, I think, like, you know, so I usually try to find, you know, something, and it doesn't even have to be like the opening scene, you know, maybe it's just something about like where the couple were or how far apart they were, and something that represented how far apart they were at the beginning. And if you can kind of mimic that or bring that into the end and then now show them how close they are, even if you can use the same device, like, kudos to you. I don't know that I've ever really truly succeeded, but if you can kind of like bring those two elements together, I think that kind of makes for a nice, and it's a nice callback, you know, as we have, like, you know, in like comedy, whatever, that's all the things like the rule of threes, all these things that you think about in comedy and in just screenwriting and all this kind of stuff. I'm always trying to like do that. So it's like, you know, oh, has this person appeared like more than twice yet? Oh, I've got to have him appear in a third time. The third person has to be the third time has to be the punch, you know, that kind of thing, you know. So I'm always kind of like looking at some of these kind of rules that are pertinent to, you know, our other arts, you know, to see if you can kind of like bring it into your writing. And that mirroring thing is, I think, good because there's a character element to it too. It's like you're showing like these characters at a certain point in time, and it's like, you know, oh, so it's not just the clever, funny device. And even though there's the pop culture kind of element to it too, I think that people immediately resonate with that when they go, oh, am I the asshole post? Yeah, I love reading those. I wonder how that integrates into this story. So I think that is kind of like a fun way. And I always try to do kind of some little, like the hero before this one, or the one twice before, was like an Instagram hockey. He was like Instagram famous as well as hockey famous kind of thing. And the heroine hated him, but she loved his Insta, you know? So she was obsessed. She's like watching his Insta, his little videos he's throwing on there. He's always doing the stuff with the biceps and the muscles and all the kind of thing. And she hates him. She thinks like he's such a jerk kind of thing. And, you know, kind of thing. And he's just like so full of himself and he's all that kind of thing. But she's like drooling along with the 1 million+ followers, you know, kind of thing. So it's always kind of fun, I think, to bring in some of these things here, just like these little pop culture thing. But as for resolution, like, so back to the question about like whether you can kind of, whether it doesn't come off as forced, you know, like getting to that engagement and the wedding or the you know, the ring and stuff like that. And like I have ended books where they're not married, you know, or they're not even engaged, you know. So it's like, and I wouldn't even call that like a happy for now. I think I would consider that a happy ever after, you know, and just because they don't have the ring on the finger or the, you know, the vows already, you know, exchanged, then I don't feel that the story has failed or the resolution has failed. I think you just want to be very clear that it's right for them, you know, and particularly if it was a fairly short or contracted period of time, you know, you could always kind of like jump ahead. And what I've started doing is I usually offer at the end of the book a bonus scene or something, like, so there'll be a link to it at the bonus scene that I kind of use as a, what we call in the biz, a reader magnet, to kind of get people to sign up for your newsletter or something along those lines. So I have this extra scene that you can only get if you, you know, sign up for my newsletter or something like that. You're going to get this extra scene, you know, and even if you're already signed up for my newsletter, you'll get it, kind of thing. And that scene will usually be like further in the future, you know, so it shows them a little bit further on down the road. And that I think will be, and I've started doing that with the last 2 to 3 books, you know, just to kind of, you know, kind of give people a little extra, because people always want the bonuses. People always want to see where the people ended up, where the couples ended up.
ended up. Exactly. Kate, it sounds like you study so much craft. Is that intentional? Like, are you reading craft books? Are you reading screenwriting books? Or are you just like a consummate student where you learn from everything that you see and try to apply it? How do you approach the craft of writing?
Well, I did read a lot, I think, at the beginning. So I did, I know I read kind of like a lot of the standard ones, so there was like, GMC book, like that Deborah Dixon book, I think it's called Goals, Motivation, Conflict. I think that's like one of the kind of the older kind of ones, but that was like one of the ones I thought that was like super important for me to kind of get into it, and just the idea of what the GMC or Goals, Motivation, Conflict means. I've read some of the standard ones, the Michael Hogue, the Save the Cat. I've done some of those. Like I've kind of gone through like all of those kind of like at least once and kind of taken from them what I think I can use. I also take a notebook where I just kind of like jot down little phrases, things I've heard, or little ideas and stuff like that. Or it used to be a notebook. Now it's just like a simple note or something like app on my phone. Like that's what I do now. So there's that kind of stuff. But to be honest, I'm some of the things is like I'm more interested also like in watching some TV shows, I think, to see how craft is done there. And I read 2-3 romance books a week, so I've never stopped reading. Like I always kind of am amazed at people when I hear that, writers say, I don't have time to read anymore. It's like, what? You got to be reading all the time. So it's like I still constantly read. And I know some people say, you shouldn't be reading in your genre while you're writing. It's in case something imprints on you and stuff like that. I used to be worried about that kind of thing. So I used to always read historical while I was drafting, so I wouldn't have any worries that I like steal something accidentally or something like that. Now I don't really worry about it too much, but I'm always kind of interested in like how some people really craft books. And some people I think are just better at it than others. I think everybody has it in them to do it. And some people, just need to kind of like do a little bit more reading to do it. But I find that reading other people's work just really kind of gets to me. And I also learn something with every new book I do. I learn something from my editor. I learn from other authors that, I'm kind of chatting with, or just even just like going online. It's amazing like how much you'll see like just ideas for books and stuff like that. It's like, okay, that would make a great romance novel. How are we going to turn that into a romance novel? But I wish, and then my husband is an actor, so he, just kind of, and improv is his kind of like thing. So he just kind of, I think, knows timing and stuff like that. And I'm always kind of like running ideas by him. I'm there, what do you think? Do you think that would work and stuff like that? Or like, and that kind of stuff. So he kind of helps me out there. So I don't read craft much anymore. I really read actual authors now. So it's like, books all the time. I'm just, and I learn something from every book, whether it's good or not. It's like, okay, it's like, that wasn't as successful. I think I might have done that a little differently. And that's something that you can take with you and put into another book, so.
Absolutely. And it's almost like once you see it, you can't unsee it. So now, like, I find that I probably ruin movies when I watch them with people because I'm always like, the setup just ended. Now we're in act 2 and like things are happening.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's really fun, like, because it actually, for me, just adds a layer of understanding. It like demystifies the process, but you need to read in the genre, be really comfortable with craft, and not see it as like a rule that's going to hold you back. It's more like a tool that's going to help uplift, your material.
Exactly.
What about this? I think this is another great question, because you are a series writer, but you write standalone. So when you come up with a concept, say for the Rookie Rebels, were you thinking for sure another series, or what comes next? Do you have something in the works next? Are you thinking big series, or have you ever written just a single standalone, not the 3 chefs, just one?
Yeah.
That's
I've actually, I've always kind of taught in the trilogy. So like the idea is like, at least at minimum, there's probably going to be 3 books. And I think part of it too is that like when you were selling to houses, for traditional publishing, it was kind of easier to sell as like a series of 2 or 3 books, kind of thing, just because, there's anything that has series potential. People are kind of like always looking for that. I've always appreciated kind of like the Band of Brothers vibe, the team vibe, that kind of thing. It kind of creates, it's not so much like, I was going to say like the sequel bait kind of thing, which we kind of like see in all of the books, so it's like, I try to be careful about like, inserting a new character into deeply to make sure, we want to make sure that that person is like, people are excited about his book or whatever when it comes along, kind of thing. So, but you don't want to like overdo it or have them take over too much time. I mean, so you have pretty much always, I think, taught in terms of series. So series kind of like makes sense to me, really. I think and maybe that's more like a romance focused thing. I mean, there are some like standalone people who write a lot of standalones in romance, but maybe like the more traditional romance tropes and stuff, I think it just kind of, the series stuff kind of works better for me, and I think when I start coming up with an idea, it's usually an idea where it's like either a family or like a team of players, or like I have like a series, like a team of lawyers, I have a team of chefs, I have a team of like Texan billionaires. I have a series with that, like, kind of thing. I was like, it's okay, that way, because once you get one person hooked on it, they're going to buy the other two, or get the other two or three, so it kind of makes sense to kind of keep it in the same world, at least for a short period of time. But a recognition then that you could extend the world or keep writing in the world. And I find that right now people are really enjoying the Rebels world. So I'm going to continue writing those, but I'm probably going to, I'm thinking about doing another firefighter series. So like, which would be, and I'm going to connect it, I think, to my older firefighter series, because that kind of just works well, I think, to send people back to older books, even though those books are traditionally published. And in a sense, it's like, I don't know if I want to send money back to the publisher, but, it's like, so so we kind of look at it and go like, oh, should I try to let those books die so that I'll get my rights reversion? But they still sell too much, and I'll never get the rights back. So I may as well just, write a series that connects to it. I'll make more money on the new series, but people will go back and read the old series, I hope. But yeah, so there's like, yeah, so and that might sound a little mercenary, but there's kind of to like, connected to an old series. But I think people find comfort in worlds that you've already built, or they loved a particular family, come back to that family, do more with that, or some kind of thing. And I could do that and have the old people be cameos. And now it's 5-6 years down the road. What are they doing? Have they had babies? Is everybody still happy? What's going on? Of course, they're all still happy and they all have babies. So, spoiler.
Right. I don't think it sounds mercenary at all. I mean, I think especially aspiring authors like don't want to necessarily hear, but should remember that this is a business not only for the authors, but for the publishers. So sometimes great books don't get picked up, and there are reasons for that. And then if that's the case, is there a space in a more indie market? Yes, like there's so much room that all the different avenues can lead to exactly what your writing goal is. I think we have one last really great question that I'll bring up here, because I think that you've answered it, but it ties to what you're talking about. So how do you keep track of all the characters in the series? If you don't, do you have like a series Bible? So if you do write new firefighters, you remember, are you going to have to reread all your own books and catch up on them?
I think I might have to reread, so here's the thing. I don't have series Bible, and I should. So that's something that I really recommend that people do if you're starting to build a world, because I didn't, and now I'm going to have to like do the work or hire somebody to do the work. You can actually hire people to write series Bibles for you now. So it's like, okay, great. So that somebody else has to do the work. Now, I do know that for my firefighter series, because it was done with Simon & Schuster, they actually, for the person who did the proof or the copy edit, I think, actually wrote a style guide for the book, and it has all the characters listed in it. So that's kind of the start of my with like eye color and like hair and all the stuff that you would want to remember when you're coming to like write books about these same characters 5 or 6 years later. So that's going to help me, I think, to start like a series Bible kind of thing. So, but I do recommend that you do that, and I don't do it right now. So that would be, if you learn anything from me today, it's like, yeah, and you're about to start a series, keep track of it, So there's ways to do that. I mean, you can do it like inside Scrivener and stuff like that, which I use Scrivener. So but I've not actually used all the features of Scrivener. So obviously.
Kate, you have been amazing, and I feel like you have given us so much to learn from and so much that's exciting. And plus, 4-Player is amazing. Like, I enjoyed it so much. I literally have not yet read Mia's brother's book, Vod, but That's my next one, because his
Good.
voice was so strong. Every time he was in a scene, I was like, oh man, I got to go back to this book. So thank you so, so much for taking the time on your Sunday, especially because I know it's your writing time, to be with us. And thanks to everyone for the questions and the engagement. Sign up and follow Kate so you don't miss any of the amazing books coming up. But thank you, Kate. You were amazing.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thanks to everybody for coming out. It was great seeing you and all the great questions. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
See
Bye,
you
Jeannie.
soon. Bye.